Hi, I'm Janet Glenn. Welcome back to Saturday Sampler here in Southington, close to home. We are on the basic block of the month. We meet the third Saturday, or in COVID world, you can pick up your kits on the third Saturday of every month. So in January, we're going to start off pretty simple with half square triangles and what I consider a strip set, and I'll show you how to cut those in a minute. So this is virtually a 9-patch, very simple, and we'll get to that in a minute. I do want to explain the borders after we're done with the block, so we'll get back to that. So let's go to the cutting for our first block of the month, which is January. So very simply, in your kit, you're going to cut one 4.5-inch red, two 4 7/8 blues, a strip of 2.5 multi and 2.5 white, and we're going to cut those at the same time. And the other piece of white is two 4 7/8 squares. All right, so we're going to cut those first off, and I'll show you a little trick. I know this is basic, so we're really going to get down to making sure that our cutting is very accurate, our pressing is very accurate, and our 1/4-inch seam. So with all three things going, you should get a very nice block at the end. I want to make sure that you know to start your kit with Mary Ellen's Best Press before you cut anything. So I've already gone ahead and put starch on my kit and pressed them, and I'm ready to cut my pieces out, okay? The only other tools you're going to need is a friction pen, which is a heat erasable to make our half square triangles. And I love these two rulers. I don't know if Heidi, you can get these. There's a little bit of glare on them. One is 8.5 by 12.5. This is a really great size to cut any size squares or smaller rectangles when a large rectangle is just too big. The 24.5 by 6.5 is great when you're cutting strips and long pieces like borders and things like that. So these two rulers are great if you're just starting out with our basic block of the month this year. All right, so the first thing we want to do is cut our strip set. So I have the white strip and the multi, and we're going to put those right sides together. So just be careful of the white on white because it is hard to tell the right side from the wrong side, but you will see the difference. The little dragonflies on this white on white should show up nice and clear. Okay, so we're going to put these two right sides together. And the first thing I want to do before I cut a 2.5-inch strip is to make sure I have at least one side of that strip that is straight. So I am right-handed, so I'm going to put my ruler in my left, hold it with my left hand, and put my fabric together best I can. And I'm just going to take a very tiny piece of fabric off to get a nice straight line. So we're going to hold our ruler down with our hand, putting some pressure on the ruler to hold it with our shoulder, being right up on top of it. Open up your rotary cutter, start right down at the bottom of the ruler, and push straight through and off the end of your fabric and close your rotary cutter. All right, having a brand new blade on your rotary cutter really helps a lot. Okay, and I am right-handed, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this nice straight edge and I'm going to turn it around. Typically I would come on the other side of the table, but I'm just going to rotate it. And I have this nice straight edge in which to use to cut my 2.5. So when I look at my ruler, this ruler in particular has a 1/2-inch mark and then 1 inch to this side. So when I'm ever cutting anything that deals with a 1/2 inch, I'll always put the 1/2 inch to the side I'm cutting. So you see the little 2.5-inch mark, so that's 1/2, 1, 2, and this line right here gets lined up exactly with my straight line that I just cut from the very, very beginning all the way through to the very, very end. As long as this sits on the 2.5, I'm okay to cut my strip. And again, pressure down on the ruler. We're going to slide our rotary cutter from the very beginning out to the very end. All right, so we're going to take this over and we're going to sew this. So we got the cutting down. Now we have to make sure we have a nice even 1/4 inch. So if you're new to quilting and you've never really tried your 1/4 inch foot, it's a good idea to practice on some nice simple strips, sew them together, press them, and measure. Are we right on the money? Are we a little wide? Did we make our seam allowances a little too wide, a little too narrow? And then we can go back and compensate. So this is a 1/4 inch foot, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the edge of my fabric with the edge of my foot. Also on the Bernina, you can see there is a little mark on my stitch plate, and that is my 1/4 inch mark. So I can line up my fabric before it even gets to the foot. So we're going to go nice and slow, and we're going to keep that edge of our foot right on the edge of the fabric. Now notice when I sew, I don't see any of the multi fabric underneath my white. And when I flip it over, I wouldn't see any white. These are exactly on top of each other. My raw edges on the sides are right on top of each other. And that's another thing to keep in mind when you're sewing for your piecing. As soon as one of the fabrics shifts out from under, then you don't have a 1/4 inch seam on both fabrics. So I'm just going to scoot this over just to make sure that they're right on top of each other, and go ahead and finish sewing my strip. Okay. We're going to press this. That's part number 3 to getting a nice accurate block. Part number 3 is once we've sewn our 1/4 inch, we're going to press this toward the multi. So in that way, we're going to keep the multi fabric on top, give it a little bit of heat, just to loosen up the fibers in our fabrics. And then I'm going to take this top one, the multi, because that's where it's going, and I'm going to flip it over and just kind of give that seam a little bit of a pressing. I don't want to go crazy and make all kinds of ripples in my seam. I just want to keep a nice press. Okay. All right, so you can touch up the other side if you'd like and just give that a press. So this is going to measure 4.5 inches wide. So let's take this back over to our cutting mat. And this is what I call a strip set. We've put 2 strips together. Some patterns would require 2, 3, 4 strips be put together and then cut at a certain width. But for this one, we're putting 2 strips together that it's going to finish at a 4.5 by 4.5 square. Okay, so now is a good time to use my little ruler. And again, when we make any kind of square rectangle, we want to make sure that we have a very even edge to go from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this solid black line right on my seam, and I'm going to trim the end so I know I have a nice 90-degree corner. Okay, so this is my trim amount, and again, I'm right-handed. I'm always cutting on the right side of my ruler, so I need to turn my strip around. So the next thing, now that I have my nice squared edges over here, I have to measure over 4.5 to get my square. So remember what I said about the 1/2 inch mark. So I'm going to put the 1/2 inch mark over on this side, line up any of these lines with the center, and go ahead and 1/2 inch, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to bring this right over to the 4. So here's my 1/2. That's 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5. And I can see that my square is lined up. It's in all the marks. Even if I put the solid line at the top, I'm still at 4.5 on the bottom. Okay? So once I have that, hold it, start off the ruler, go into the fabric, and push away. All right, so we have 4.5 again. My half, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've lined up the top of my strip with the 4.5 mark and the bottom of my strip. I'm going to cut my second 4.5 square. My third and the last one. All right. If you find that as you go down a strip set and this seam is not on a mark anymore going straight across, then turn it around, straighten it up again with a nice straight edge, and flip it around and go ahead and make your square. All right, so we have those. Next thing we want to work on is our 4 7/8 half square triangles. So this time we need the blue and the white right sides together. Again, watch that white, make sure that it's the right side. I'm going to cut my edge off, making sure I get both blue and white. Rotate it. Now I'm looking for 4 7/8. It's not a half. So this time I'm going to go with the whole number inch on the edge. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and that would be 5. So 7/8 is that one little notch right before 5. So that's 4 7/8. So as long as it's 4 7/8 all the way down my nice clean edge, I can go ahead and cut a strip that's 4 7/8 wide. Okay, so what do we do with a square? We have to square up our ends. Once again, line up any line at the top of your strip and give it a nice 90-degree corners. Okay, turn it one more time. Look for 4 7/8 square. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7/8, 7/8, 4 7/8, 7/8, 7/8, all the way down, and even all the way to the bottom of my strip. So I have a square. Okay, and keep those together for a sec. One more time, because I need 2 of them. 4 7/8. Let's measure 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 7/8 mark all the way down, and again 4 7/8 right there. Okay. So when I'm making half square triangles, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my square, I'm going to draw one diagonal line, and on this one I think I'll put it on the white because it's going to be easier to see. So we're going to make our diagonal line, and again I use my same ruler and I look for this 45-degree line that comes right down my ruler. Then I'm going to put that in the corner, line it up with the base of my square, and it's going to come right out that corner. Okay, so take your friction pen, just give it a little bit of a mark from that corner to that corner. Okay, half square triangles are super easy. You can make them in any size. Just add 7/8 of an inch to the square of the finished size. So in this case, our squares are going to finish at 4 inches. So we are going to cut our squares 4 7/8. Draw my line diagonally once. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew 1/4 inch from that line, and then I'm going to chain piece, sew 1/4 inch from that line, come around, sew 1/4 inch down. So I can't necessarily see that mark anymore. So remember that mark that I showed you on my stitch plate? I can't see that mark anymore. So I have to go by the edge of my foot. All right. So get that nice and straight, lined up right with the foot, and go ahead and sew 1/4 of an inch. So this line eventually is going to be cut, and it's going, instead of cutting first and sewing second, we're eliminating a lot of the stretch that's on the bias right here through this square. There's a lot of stretch right here, so we want to try to keep that together before we cut it apart. So we're going to sew that. Like I said, we're going to sew down both sides, both squares, lift my needle, lift my foot, and then I'm going to come around and I'm going to do this side. Again, get that foot lined up right on the line, edge of your foot, and continue. So really nice 1/4 of an inch seam right here. It takes practice. Get the next one lined up and continue. And the more you do, the better you'll get. Okay, so once those are sewn, the last thing we want to do is cut these in half. So I'll just take my little rotary cutter, cut my threads. And this was where I started. Okay, so we're going to take our ruler and we're going to place it right on that line, and I see the stitching underneath, and this tool, actually this ruler has a 1/4 of an inch dashed line right here, so I can line that up. Also, see the blue threads under there? I can line up the black dashed lines and have a nice 1/4 of an inch. So it's another good way to test yourself to see if you are sewing a 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so we're going to cut this right on the line, and then we'll go press it. Okay, so we'll go press these, and we have our half squares, and we're almost ready to put our block together. So remember, if we wanted to get the seam to press toward the dark fabric is on top. Give the fabric a little bit of warmth, and then just kind of push this seam right out. Okay, and then a little bit of heat, and we're pressing, and we stop. So try not to iron back and forth, just a little press. And these are nicely pressed right here. There's no sometimes what happens is we press them and they get like this little pleat in them. You want to make sure that it's completely open and pressed to one side. Okay, so we'll do it again. Do it again, a little warmth, flip it, a little bit of warmth. All right. And the last piece we're going to cut is our red center, and then we can put our blocks together. So that is a half square triangle. And that should measure 4.5 inches, and it's going to finish at 4. All right, so our center square is 4.5, so let's go through this really quick. When I'm cutting any square, any rectangle, we start with a fresh cut, rotate it, measure over what we need, which in this case is 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. So I'm looking at the black lines when I'm using the 1/2 inch. 4.5. So I have a nice strip. No matter how big this is, it's going to be 4.5. I'm going to line up the top of my strip with a nice solid line. Rotate it. And now I have 3 sides that are at 4.5. All I have to do is put them in my ruler. Over to 4.5, down the 4.5, and over the 4.5. And we have a square. All right, so simply, we're going to make this into a 9 patch just by laying these out and creating our block. Okay. So when we sew these together, I like to sew my rows together and then each row once my rows are together, sew each row. So I would press these toward the strip set. I would press this one toward the strip set, and I would press these toward the strip set. And that'll allow you to really lock your intersections. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the border. The border, you'll get the directions for the border, so I'm not going to go too much in detail on the border. It's just made with triangles, rectangles, and squares. Very simply, we start with a half square triangle. We're adding this little 2.5 inch square here, sewing it on the line, and then we're pressing that over. These are simply squares that were cut in half. These were quarter squares, so it tells you cut a square, cut it on the diagonal twice, and you get a quarter square. And you're just making this one little patch right here. Of course, adding our medium color to it. And then we're going to sew these together, these to our square, our corners to the ends. So in essence, we can have all our borders done way ahead of time, way before we even get our block, so that when our block is finished, we can go ahead and just add the sides, top and bottom, and we'll have our borders done. So to sew and cut all the borders, you should plan on a full day's of work, but you'll be really happy that you got it all done. Okay. A couple rules going forward as far as block of the month. Much like I told the intermediate sampler last week, you will need to show your finished block to get your free kit. So when you come in to pick up your February kit on the 3rd Saturday in February, please make sure you do bring your kit. Your block, okay? Kits are always available the 3rd Saturday, beginning this Saturday, January 16th. And borders are optional. Please don't feel like you have to get these done for February or March or anything. You can start these anytime in the year, whenever you have free time to do the borders. This is optional. Your block's 20 inches, and it actually is going to look really pretty when all 12 blocks are done, and you'll have a beautiful quilt waiting at the end. So the directions and the fabric quantities for the borders will be available Saturday, but don't feel like you have to rush into it. And pick your own colors for the border. I just picked those, but we got lots to choose from. All right. Any questions? You can call us 860-793-6639, and we can do curbside if that makes you comfortable. But we hope to see you. Thanks. Bye.